Oh, hey guys, I'm Dragon. This episode, I have some highly requested characters for you guys. These three were in the comments a lot, so we're doing them today. And we're starting off with Captain Fiddles. I think the reason I put Captain Fiddles off so much is because I just didn't know what to do for him. You know, he's a very simple shape, there's not much to him, there's not much in terms of personality we see with him, than what I know at least. So I decided to just sort of lean into the captain side of his name, and I decided to make him a younger student who is really into pirates, and therefore will dress up as a pirate and carries around his little wooden sword and all that. Wanted to really make sure there was a lot of personality in his pose and his accessories, in his facial expression, but in terms of his general body shape, I kept him pretty much the same. With the cartoon forms, I always like to keep a thicker brush. This makes the line up bolder and almost crisper as well, and that really fits the theme of cartoon better. A lot of cartoons are animated as a vector, that being more modern cartoons that are done digitally, not the traditional ones. And vector is basically, it's really sharp edges. You don't get the softer, more pixelated edges, which you see here in this program that I draw with, because it's a bitmap program, it's an art program, and bitmap art programs are more to do with blurring and painting, and they have the softer edges, softer look, whereas vector programs are hard edges, they are more like cell shading and all that sort of thing. Most actual artist programs for the purpose of digital drawing and painting and illustrating will be in bitmap. I tell you what though, I actually remembered him being blue. Now I know there are like different, clones of him. There's loads of Captain Fiddles, There's loads of him around. I know they're all different colours, but I seem to remember the main one that you see in the cutscenes in the car and all that. I just remembered him being like a light blue, like a sort of sky blue, like sort of a pastel sky blue. I don't know where I got that from, that's just what I remembered. When I obviously looked up his reference image, I saw he was more of like a lighter pastel purple instead. So while I envisioned him in my head being blue, that's what I envisioned the two cartoon and monster forms looking. I ended up going with the purple anyway because it was closer to the canon, and the colours wasn't really something that I was planning to change on him anyway. You know, he is one colour, there's not much there for a colour palette. And to really make him recognisable as Captain Fiddles, I decided to keep with the main colour that is used for him in-game. I really struggled on his monster form because, like, what am I going to do with what is basically a square with arms and legs? Like, so in the end I decided to go for sort of like an ogre-like creature. Sort of quite beefy, but in a more sort of like fantasy giant sort of way. And I thought this actually be quite sort of funny and ironic because I still imagine him, even while he's looking like this, to be quite small. Probably no taller than your knee, maybe even smaller than that. And I imagine it a bit like the Compies in Jurassic Park. If you remember the small little dinosaurs that you think because they're tiny they can't do anything to you, but then as soon as they group up and they swarm you, that's it, you're done, you're taken down. And that's what I imagine these guys doing. That on their own they're not a threat, but if there's lots of them together, then you better run because they will group up on you, they will all jump on you, they will swarm you, and they will take you down that way. Another part of the design I decided to go with is sort of these bulbous bug eyes. I just felt that sort of normal eyes would look a bit boring almost. I didn't want this to just be a buff Captain Fiddles, you know. So I thought adding those eyes and making them sort of sticking out and bulbous, making them really sore and red. And I also imagine that maybe he can't even blink, it's quite painful for him. It just adds to the horror aspects of the design really. I also decided to give him veins in areas, like these really big inflamed veins that you get on really muscular people and like the sort of people that use a word that YouTube won't like me to use but begins with S. Just to add a bit of freakishness to it. You know, this unnatural beefiness that he probably shouldn't have. And I guess that's also why I went for the bulbous eyes. That it's almost like he's grown beyond what he should have been. His muscles have expanded beyond what they should have been naturally. And as a result, everything is just really, really expanded and bulbous and sore and inflamed, including his eyes just having popped out of his head due to all the pressure of everything having expanded. This design is really one that relies more on the context of why things are like that rather than the actual visual look of it. And I went the more context route because I just didn't know what else to do with them, honestly. Usually I like to have it that it's a mix of both visual horror and contextual horror. But with this guy, I didn't know what to do. He's just a square with arms and legs, like... As always, when I'm colouring, I use my trusty watercolour brush. I had it on a very slight blotch texture. This guy probably doesn't have much texture to his skin, but it's just enough to make it look a bit more organic and natural. And then I mainly went around just defining the areas of where bones and ligaments and tendons and muscles would be seen. You know, the things that I didn't add in line art, because sometimes I find adding those things in line art can make it look a bit unrealistic. At the very end, after I've done all the painting, I just add a couple of layers of shading with overlay, just to really define areas, just to make sure shadows are popping out and highlights are popping out, just to help separate parts from each other. I just like to make sure everything is defined and it doesn't blend into each other too much. Next up we have the villain of Garten and Banban, and the guy with the absolute weirdest name I've ever heard in my life, Sir Dadadoo. This is another one that I've put off because, again, I just had no idea what to do for him. I knew he's meant to be a leech, but that's about it. And unlike Captain Fiddles, where I probably had more problem with his monster form, in this one I had more problem figuring out what to do for his cartoon form. And he ended up actually looking a lot more like he looks in-game for the cartoon form. You know, just this sort of partially slug thin, and he's got no eyes, he's got his tie, he's got his gloves. And keeping to the villain form, I decided that he probably would be the quote-unquote villain of the cartoon. And by that I mean he'd probably be the really strict teacher that no one actually likes. He's overly strict, he punishes students for like no reason just because he feels like it. He's the bad guy of the cartoon. I did decide that having him have a wide open mouth probably won't work so well for the cartoon form. If he's got no eyes, which is quite an important part of his design, then there still needs to be a way for him to emote. He still needs to be able to show personality and emotion and all that sort of thing. And so making sure he has a mouth that he can actually move and articulate is important for him to be able to show that emotion and personality. This also goes for characters that have masks. If you notice in the superhero films like with Spider-Man or Deadpool, they're always really flamboyant with their body language. Their arms are always moving around, they're always sort of really exaggerated with their body movements. And this is because they need to be able to convey their emotion and their personality through their body language, because their face is covered up, and therefore you can't read their emotion through their face. And that's pretty much the same here with Sir Dadadoo. If he had no eyes and a completely static mouth, then it would be really hard to read emotion from him. And with him being a cartoon and it being really simple, he probably doesn't have as much flamboyancy to him. I mean, he is sort of a bit of a chubby slug guy, so he probably doesn't move much anyway. So I definitely wanted to make sure he could convey emotion by having him have a movable, articulated mouth. As for his monster form, I took inspiration from a couple of different creatures. One being, of course, a leech, which I think is what he's meant to be in game. Do correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think he's meant to be a leech. And the other is the lamprey eel. You may remember back in part 2 that I was doing Nab Nab, and I said, if you don't know what a lamprey eel looks like, don't Google it, you're gonna regret it. Yeah, well, I'm sorry guys, here's the lamprey eel in full view for you. Enjoy the monstrousness of it. I don't know why this thing exists. Nah, I won't be mean to it. It probably exists for a reason. He's just a little guy. He's just trying to live his life. Anyways, the lamprey eel was going to be used for the mouth. And I was going to do these sort of sharpish teeth. I don't know if they're quite teeth on the lamprey eel, but they're sort of these sharp points it has. And I was going to do that, but then I thought I wanted to be able to show that this guy used to probably be a human at one point. Going off the assumption that they all used to be a human. I thought it might be fun to exaggerate that by having each row of teeth, every tooth, be a human tooth. Specifically the molar. Human teeth where they're not supposed to be is one of the creepiest things you could do in horror. In a horror design, that is. I mean, even in real life when you get those tumours that can grow human teeth, it's just disgusting, it's creepy, it freaks everyone out. And some may see it as like an easy way out to do something like that. I think it works quite well for this design. I also decided to make him really, really beefy. This guy is definitely bigger, he's definitely got more sort of body fat, but it's the sort of body fat that you see in the world's strongest men, where it's actually like so much muscle as well. Like, next to Jumbo Josh, this guy's probably one of the strongest characters in the game, if you ask me, in terms of the design that I'm doing here. And I really wanted to exaggerate that by giving him a really big, beefy body type. I even made it so his arms are so beefy that they sort of are out to his sides because they just can't go in properly. He can't lay them down by his sides properly because the muscles are so beefy in them. I really, really wanted to exaggerate him as being a big, strong threat. Just like Captain Fiddles, I kept Dadadoo's colour palette pretty much the same as in game. I just dulled it down a little bit, brought down the saturation, especially on the tie and gloves, make them seem a bit more old and grungy. And I also added a stripe of purple going down his body to mimic the reference image of the leeches I had. Not all leeches have this, but there is a type of leech that has this sort of yellow stripe. It's a black leech that has a yellow stripe going down its body. And I just thought it added another extra dimension to the design. I imagined it going down both sides of the body. Obviously you only see one side in the drawing, but I imagined it being on both sides. And I just thought it added a bit extra and I just liked how it looked, so I added the stripe. No other explanation there. But I decided to add a majority of the detail into the mouth because this is the focal point of the design. This is the part that really adds to the horror. So I really wanted to make sure that was nice and detailed just to draw the eye of the viewer into this abyss of a mouth. The rest of the painting was basically defining the ridges of his body because I gave him the sort of ridges that leeches have, the sort of segments. I don't know if they're full segments, but you know, the creases, I guess. Look, I've just come straight off of a driving lesson where it was really, really busy on the roads. I am mentally exhausted. I don't know how to commentate right now. So basically, yeah, just finishing off the painting, doing the shading layers, and then he was done. We interrupt this video to bring you a message from our sponsor, me! If you're interested in keeping up with updates about me when videos are coming out, or just in general having a community where you can chat about art and share your art, then go down to the description and check out my Discord server, Drago's Community. We have channels for every single art medium you can think of. We have giveaways, art contests, a gaming category, a place for streaming and voice chatting, a new question every single day for you to answer, and a wonderful staff team who will help you out with everything and anything. So if you've been looking for an art community and also enjoy my videos, then hop on into my Discord server and have fun. When Chapter 7 came around, there was no character requested more than Syringeon. And once again, I put off doing him because I did not know what to do for him. Like, these characters are so hard to think of ideas for them sometimes. But I decided to go for the idea that Syringeon is the school nurse. He's the one that kids will go to when they're injured. And I decided to give him sort of a bit of a cocky demeanour. You know, sort of really proud of himself, thinks he's the best around. In terms of being a doctor, he's the best doctor. Probably thinks he should be doing more than being a school nurse. He probably thinks he should be like the top neurosurgeon or something in the biggest hospital there is. So quite cocky, quite sassy, quite grumpy as well at times. Probably doesn't really like the kids, you know? Now for the cartoon form, I decided to make him into a hammerhead shark because I was going for an idea here where the intention was for him to be a hammerhead shark. And you'll see why I'm emphasising shark later on when we get to the monster form. But I did keep his forearms because I like the idea that he has forearms to make him really efficient at being a doctor. I can imagine him sitting down a student and then his arms going all over the place as he really efficiently works. He grabs one thing, he uses it with another arm, he uses another thing with another arm, you know, he's really efficient with it. Probably in the cartoon they'd be just a blur of him using them. That's the idea I was going for there with the forearms. Definitely a design aspect from the original that I wanted to keep. I also dressed him up in actual doctor clothes just to give it a bit more of a he is a doctor vibe. Or rather, he'd want to be a doctor, he's actually only a nurse. Don't tell him that I told you that. But yeah, I gave him the sort of accessories and stuff that a doctor/nurse would usually have. I don't know why my microphone is picking up like a background noise because I can't hear anything. So if there's like a weird background noise, I apologise because I genuinely don't hear it and I don't know what my microphone is picking up because usually it doesn't just have a background hum that it does. Usually it'll go dead quiet when I'm not talking, so there's something it's picking up that I'm not hearing and I apologise. Anyways, back to Syringeon. Is he an evolution? I had a lot of trouble with his face and his hands and all that, but I think eventually I got there. One thing that's for sure is I definitely didn't want him holding a needle. That'd be terrifying to a child for him to be holding a needle. And this is for a kid's cartoon, so I definitely decided to omit the needle from the cartoon design. Just have him holding a thermometer and a bottle of pills or something. I was going to give him a shark tail, but it didn't look very good, so I went against it. And he does have a shark fin on his back, and I did try to add that in just to make it so that people know it's there. But of course, with the angle that he stood at, you wouldn't be able to fully see it. And rather than just making him one flat colour, I decided to add an accent colour, that being a lighter pink, just to mimic how a hammerhead shark has the sort of lighter underneath and the darker on top of his body. So I mimicked that with a accent colour of lighter pink. Now, earlier I said I was emphasising hammerhead shark for the cartoon form, and here's why. I found out that there is something called the hammerhead worm, and if you look at the shape of the hammerhead worm in terms of the shape of the head, I have a feeling this is what Syringeon was actually based on. It's got that same sort of curliness to it, and just the way his sort of head is, and it's quite thin. I think he was actually based off a hammerhead worm, so I'm very glad I discovered this creature even existed before I started drawing him. I mean, I went with the idea of worm because my friend mentioned that he looks like a flatworm to her, and that's where we also got the idea of the proboscis. Now, if you don't know what a proboscis is, just look at the reference. It's when certain worms spit out that white thing that sort of trails along like veins of tree roots. It's called a proboscis, and it's a way that they hunt prey. They use it to sort of feel around. It's an internal part of them that they spit out and then can suck back in. It's actually the proboscis, and I wanted Syringeon to have that. Because my idea here is that he is blind. He doesn't have any eyes. Or if he does have eyes, they are really small and useless. And you're probably thinking, well, how can he be a surgeon or a doctor if he doesn't have eyes? Well, that's the creepy part of it. Imagine going into surgery and you're being told your surgeon is blind. You'd be terrified. So again, it's adding that context to the design which adds to the horror. It took me such a long time to come up with a pose that I liked though. My first idea was to have him sort of leaning over onto his arms and he's vomiting up the proboscis onto the floor to get a feel for his surroundings and wander around. Didn't like that, so instead I tried to have him sort of rearing up. Didn't like how that looked, so I went back to the initial pose. I imagine this guy scattering on the floor on his arms more than anything else. He has 2 human-shaped legs. He could stand up, but he's so long in his body now that he'll topple, he'll wobble, he'll probably fall over. He just doesn't have the balance to. So while he can probably stand up straight for a short period of time, it's just easier for him to be bent down and leaning on his arms on the floor. And that's what I went for. After settling on the pose, I also got a reference of the bloodworm. Mainly I wanted it for the mouth, the bulbousness of the sort of neck and head area, and the general sort of ridge crease shape of the body, as well as these sort of, I don't know if you can call them spines, but it just does have these pointy bits that go along the side. These are all things that I wanted to use to add dimension to him, because I didn't want him to look like an earthworm. If I just added the lines for the ridges, he would just look like an earthworm, and that's not what I was going for. An earthworm isn't really that scary, so he ended up being a mix of the hammerhead worm, the ribbon worm, which uses a proboscis, and the bloodworm. This guy has so much weird DNA in him. And you may be thinking, why did they go worms if they had hammerhead shark DNA right there? And that's what they wanted. Well, I like to imagine they made a mistake, and while looking for the hammerhead shark DNA, they accidentally picked up the hammerhead worm DNA, and here we are with this abomination. You know, both are called hammerhead, so easy mistake to make, I guess. But yeah, that's what I was going for. In terms of the lore of this AU, I guess you can call it at this point, it's basically Drago's AU of Garten and Banban, which I'm not going to expand beyond these videos because I don't really like Garten and Banban, but good enough, you know, if people enjoy it, then I don't mind. Of course, I also kept the tools attached to his arms, made it like the skin sort of breaks and tears away to reveal the tools that he has, and they are replacements for his hands. He also kept his doctor's jacket. I thought about not giving it to him, then I remembered that I allowed Jumbo Josh to keep his jacket, so I thought if Jumbo Josh can have his jacket in monster form, why can't Syringeon? So he still has his beloved doctor jacket. The good thing about Syringion's colour palette is it's already very, very close to things like the bloodworm and ribbon worm and all that. So I didn't have to stray far from the original in-game colours to make something that looks like him. The main thing to add was shades of yellow. I was mostly going off what the bloodworm looks like with its colour palette, and so I wanted to add shades of yellow to the skin as a result, and also lighten areas to really show off how bulbous and tight the skin is there. More than any of the others, a lot of the sort of definition was going to come in the texturing and painting in this one, especially on the main head. I don't know what it is that I could say it is, but it's just got these segments of like a yellowy tone in between a darker pink tone. I don't know why the bloodworm has that, I don't know what you'd call it, but it's there, and that's what I was mimicking throughout the head and the whole body. So yeah, and unlike the others, which I like to use much darker colour palettes, much more dull and less saturated. This one actually had much more saturated colours because the animal I was basing it on has quite saturated pink and red colours to it. Other details I added in the texturing, I made the metal tools rusty, and I added some old blood splatters onto his doctor's jacket. By old I mean I made them more sort of a brownish shade, you know, because dry blood is usually more of a brown colour. And unlike the other two where I use sort of more blue shading tones, I use yellowish shading tones here just to add to the grunginess and fit with the colour palette a bit better, as yellow shades were used within the colour palette. It just gave it more depth and personality over just having a neutral blue lighting. I also added some shiny spots because he's a worm and worms are shiny, so yeah, it just exaggerates the fact that he's a worm better, and yeah, basically that's it. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Here are the 3 character redesigns: Captain Fiddles, Sir Dadadoo, and Syringeon. Let me know down below in the comments which one is your favourite, and also let me know which 3 characters you would like to see for the next episode. Keep things short and sweet because I'm tired. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, maybe leave a like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Hit the bell to know when I upload the next part of the series, and I will hopefully see all you wonderful people in the next video. Bye!